This is a presentation on relational design with a focus on FileMaker. I'm Jeremiah Hammond. I'm a senior technical project manager at DB Services. I've been doing FileMaker development for a decade now. I'm certified in 16 through 10, and I'm the trainer for classes at DB Services that we offer, which you can see that on our website if you're interested in training. And then our background, a little bit of background on DB Services, we're a FileMaker Platinum partner. We're part of the Apple Consultant Network, and we currently have a staff of 17 with 13 certified developers. I believe that's the correct count, something like that. Okay, so I do have some assumptions in this presentation. I've assumed you've at least used FileMaker to create a FileMaker file. It could be a flat file, doesn't need to be relational, but you've used FileMaker, created a table, created some fields, you've played around the relationship graph a little bit, you have familiarity, right? But you want to know how to take those files and connect them, or one file and create relationships between tables. Take your FileMaker application to the next level. So the topics we're going to cover, the first one is, before you can even create relationships in FileMaker, you have to have a data model of some kind, right? You can't just go into FileMaker and just be like, create table, name it table 1, table 2, table 3. I mean, you can, but it'll be very hard to use your application or to build off of it as a developer. So the first step is, what's my data model? And then the second step is actually implementing that data model in your FileMaker system. So we'll go over that. And then the last part of the presentation, we'll briefly go over ERDs because they're useful to have. They're basically documentation on the data model. We'll touch on context because pretty much everything you do in FileMaker requires you to understand context. And then we'll briefly look at two different graph methodologies, relationship graph methodologies, and compare them and look at that in a lens of context. So, okay, this first part, identifying relationships and modeling relationship keys. So this is actually a small example of an ERD. The boxes there are tables, but with ERDs, they actually don't use the word table, they use entity. It doesn't really matter what you use, it's the same sort of thing. And then the line between the boxes is a relationship. And then the little marks indicate what are called cardinality, which tells you the type of relationship. So you're going to see these throughout the presentation. In this case, the order to customer is one customer right here can, so this little dash means one customer can have many orders. That's what the little crow's foot is, it's many. And then this order to products is actually a many-to-many relationship, and we'll go over those a little bit. There's more relationships than just those two, but those are the main two, a one-to-many and a many-to-many. Okay, so to determine a data model, you got to build your application, you need a data model, but your data model centers around what problems you're trying to solve with your application. So you need an example problem, or you need to define your problem in the problem space. And so in this case, here's an example. So we have ABC Automotive. They need an app to track their orders. And so you visit their shop, and they told you, here's the following things that this application needs to do for us. And we need to be able to enter and track orders with the ability to assign customers and products to an order. They need to be able to track the status of an order. They need to be able to manage customers' multiple addresses. They have to track the date of a customer's first order. And they would like to have a dashboard showing actual items to make things easy for them when they're using the application. And they also like to use the application on mobile devices. So we're going to run with this for the presentation. Okay, so once you have a problem defined, step one to determine your data model is you need to identify possible entities. And to do that, you need to identify all the nouns in your problem statement. And so I have it's kind of hard, I think, with just the equipment here, but I've highlighted the nouns in blue. So orders, customers, products, status, dashboard, mobile device, etc. Now, you're going to get all those nouns. The thing with that is that it's a good first start, but you need to determine which items in that list your app needs to track, because not all those nouns do we need to track? In other words, which are inside your problem space. So if we look back on here, orders are an example of something that you do need to track. It even says that right there, enter and track orders. Customers we need to track because customers, you need to assign customers to an order. Need products, you need to assign a product to an order. So all those are pretty straightforward. But what about like mobile device? Mobile device isn't something that you would actually track in the application. That's not part of your entities. That's just describing the environment that the application is going to run under. So that would not be something that you include in your data model. Okay, and then once you determine the items that you want to track, you then want to determine which are entities or attributes. Another way to think about entity or attribute is the type of thing is an entity versus the characteristic of that thing that's an attribute. So, for example, if we go back here again, an order is a type of thing, but if you want to track the date of an order, that date is actually a characteristic of that order. So that date would be an attribute of the order. How you doing? We have pizza over there if you're hungry. Okay, so once you've got your items that you want to track, and then you've determined which ones are entities, which are attributes, that's step 1 and 2. And one thing that you can do too that I found useful when I first started doing database development a decade ago is leverage the spreadsheet metaphor. So when I was first doing FileMaker development, I was very familiar with Excel, right? Excel was, I grew up learning Excel in school, using Excel in school. So I kept going back to that. And this translates spreadsheet terms, data model terms, database terms. So if you think about a spreadsheet, a worksheet itself, one worksheet is a table or an entity. And then a column in your spreadsheet, like let's say that you have a spreadsheet of contacts, right? Each row is a contact. That would be considered a record or an instance of an entity if you're talking about data models. And then the columns are like what would be a column for a contact? First name, last name, date of birth, etc. Those would be attributes, or with databases, they'd be fields. So you can, in your mind, I use that. I think the spreadsheet terminology really helped me to understand what I was working with. And I think it can help you too when it comes to determining what things are entities or attributes. Just think about, if I was making a spreadsheet for this entity, if I was making a spreadsheet, would this thing be a sheet? Would it be a column, etc.? So, all right, so here's our revised list. So we're going to be, in our data model, we've got orders, customers, products, order status, customer address, and the first order date. And then I put in here which ones are entities, which are attributes. Okay, so once you have your revised list, we've got step 3. Determining the attributes of entities. Now, I know that in that previous list, we had a few attributes, but those were not the extent of all of the attributes you're going to be tracking per entity. And so here's a example list, and this is definitely not all of the attributes you would track for each of these entities. But like for customer, you're going to want to track their name, type of business. For an order, you want to track the customer, the status, et cetera, et cetera. So once you've determined your entities, you're going to have to determine the attributes you want to track for that. And so how do you do that? It's not an exact science. You're going to need to work with, if you're building an application for someone else, whether it's your customer or if it's your boss or et cetera, you're going to have to work with them to determine what things they need to track. And what they need to track is going to depend on what problems they're solving. So it's going to be kind of a back and forth collaborative thing, and you're going to add fields over time, attributes over time to these entities as you further refine your data model and build your application out. Okay, so that is, to recap the steps: find potential entities and attributes. You want to eliminate things outside the problem space, and then distinguish attributes from entities, and then determine the attributes for each entity. And you're going to revise this. This is going to be an ongoing thing. it won't ever stop. I mean, honestly, like you're going to release this application out, and then V2, V3, V4, your updates, you're going to be adding to your data model. You're going to add fields to existing tables as you need it, as you have new problems to solve. So, anyone have any questions on that? Go ahead.
With FileMaker, you find yourself making a lot of tables for those attributes, or I guess another way to say it, you make your tables flat and wide, you find yourself trying to get normal one.
Yeah. So, do we make flat tables in FileMaker, or do we hyper-relational? So, with FileMaker, I think there's a balance, but we don't make them hyper-relational. I think FileMaker, if you try to split out things into one-to-one relationships, and we'll get into those in a little bit, I think it gets harder to develop in, and it can actually, depending on what you're doing, it can actually slow things down. So,
my example is I've seen other systems where they're very, very normalized. Big, iron, ERP are heavily normalized. They may be 60 tables where if you see the FileMaker equivalent, you may see 15. And like the status table, there'll be a table for status. You see what I'm saying? You find yourself making tables for status.
No, not unless, yeah, yes, no, not normally.
And the primary reason is that
we have to have a reason. I mean, I think when it comes to developing, as you become a more experienced developer, you only build something when you need to, right? You want to keep it as simple as possible until you know you need that added complexity. And I feel like that's added complexity. You're kind of just making things super relational just because it makes you feel better or you feel like you're doing the right thing. But that's not the good way to approach it. That's like an idealistic way to approach it. You should be approaching it from a practical standpoint.
Right, and then you can put that in a table. So, for example, like you can say there's 3 status. There's pending and progress. And you make a table like that. And the statuses will have numerical values. 1 is pending, 2 is in progress, 3 completed, 4 is canceled. And then so in your main table of orders, you go when the user's selecting the status, it's actually entering the foreign key of 1 for the status, and so it's pending. So you see what I'm saying? I've seen those. That's how my access to that's how it is. There's got a bunch of extra tables in there that are defined that this number means this. They're almost like valueless. Yes. And what Jeremiah is saying is in FileMaker we typically don't do that. Like valueless.
Right. Yeah. I find that I will make a status table or another valueless table if I need to associate a second thing to a status or to that value in a value list. So it's like when you select pending, it needs to like autofill a couple more fields based on that sometimes, and I will make a table for that, especially if a user needs to change that information themselves. Like not the status, but if they need to change that second or third thing that goes along with the status, then you may have to do that, but it's not common. You don't do it unless you have to. Again, only when you're trying to solve a problem.
The reason is it will slow down development and potentially slow down the app's performance if it's constantly doing lookups for like number 1.
Yeah, I know that I personally, and this just is the way my brain works. I know, and Kevin can attest to this, I made things way more complex than they needed to be when I first started developing. And I think part of it's because I just didn't know what was important to care about, or what things were going to be problems, what things weren't. So I erred on the side of making things probably too relational or making them too modular. So, I know that you learn over time what things you should care about and what things you shouldn't. So, and hopefully you're working with someone who has some experience because they can guide you along that path and make it a little faster. So instead of you taking years for you to really learn that, you get an expedited version of it in a year and a half, like our employees do. So, Any other questions before I move on? Okay. All right. So we've got our entities and our attributes. So we're not done with data model. The data model, there's a third thing, relationships. So how do you determine the relationships between your entities? Unfortunately, that's also not an exact science. So with one-to-many relationships, there is kind of a a systematic way you can determine. So what you do is you compare your list of entities and their attributes, and if you see an entity show up as an attribute in another entity, that's usually a natural relationship. So for example, if we go back to here, you'll see that we have an entity customer. It shows up as an attribute of an order. So that right there should tell you that there's a relationship between order and customer. And then the same thing would be the case with order and product. There is a relationship between them, but it's not as straightforward as customer order. We'll get to that. But the one-to-many, that is a systematic way to determine those relationships. So, and we just touched on that at the beginning of the presentation. So one-to-many and many-to-many, again, those are the two common ones. And then Kevin mentioned one-to-ones. So those are basically your three main types of relationships you deal with. So once you have determined your relationships between your entities, the next step is to then model them with keys, is what it's called. So to make those relationships, so as we saw, like a customer and an order are related, but how do you actually like get that to work in a database? How do you tell a database these things are related, especially when it comes to FileMaker? What you need are what are called keys. So you need primary keys and foreign keys to get these relationships to work. And so you can actually see right here, and this is our naming convention. Different people do different things, but this top one right here, this is the way we name primary keys. So that's a primary key right there. And then we've got these foreign keys for different relationships. Okay, so what's a primary key? So a primary key is a unique identifier in a table. So it uniquely identifies each record in a table. Each record has their own unique value in this primary key field. So examples of serial numbers, I think everyone's, understands serial numbers, right? Like when I make a new order, that's order number 1000. When I make the next order, it's 1001, 1002, 1003, and they all have their own value, unique value. And then the other common primary key in FileMaker are what are called UUIDs. Have you guys seen UUIDs? You know what I'm talking about when I say UUIDs? They're like a crazy long string of characters, looks like a random string of characters. Yeah, you should probably see these. We actually use those over serial numbers as much as possible. So this is actually an example one right here. So it's kind of a long, scary string of digits and numbers and letters. I know that before I started doing development, like I'd see that, like sometimes, a software you'll be using to software computer, and then like that one of those things will show up, and you're like, yeah, it's very geeky. But what's really nice about these is you could just sit here and keep generating them. With FileMakers, the function is get UUID. You can just sit here and keep generating them, and you will never get the same one. You will die before you get. All the human species could just sit here and just do this for the rest of their lives, and no one. And the likelihood of one person getting a UUID is extremely infinitesimal. So UUIDs, there's multiple reasons why we use them. That it's beyond the scope of the presentation, but they're very useful for syncing if you have offline copies versus serial numbers. But anyway. Yeah. I guess I'll go into it a little bit. So we use UIDs because we do a lot of live development. And if you're in Managed Database in the Fields section, so I'll just go in there real quick. If you're in there, and you're just changing a field, if I go in here and I make a change, you've actually locked the table if you have a serial number in that table. This is a very unique FileMaker thing. This is, I'm sure, not going to apply to any other type of database system. But in FileMaker, when you're in this field options, no users of your application can create records in this table while you're sitting here like this in field options. And that's historically been an issue for us. And what could happen is if you have a script that's like creating a record in this table in the background, and you don't have proper error trapping, that's going to just fail while you're in here as a developer, and no one's going to notice maybe for a week or two until they run a report and they're like, oh, these numbers are low, what's going on, right? And then if you trying to troubleshoot that is almost impossible, because they come to you and go, we're missing a bunch of records, what happened? You could spend hours trying to like look at the code to see if there's some bug, but it was really you on that day 2 weeks ago in managed database. So yeah, we recommend UIDs as much as you can for primary keys, though we recognize that there are going to be times where your application is going to need a human-friendly unique identifier, like on a print form or on a screen. Like a lot of people like order numbers or invoice numbers that are serial numbers, that they want to see that. And so there's definitely times where you can't avoid serial numbers. With the UIDs? I'm sorry, with serial numbers?
Well, yeah, basically instead of using the bridge number as serial number, using UID. What do I duplicate the bridge number, not knowing? What you can do is there's validation option.
Yeah, I can show you that.
And you can set validation requires value. Validation.
Yeah.
Well, not yet. Just put it that way. Basically, the data that I deal with, blind and think of counties. So basically, I get requested to take the data and generate reports.
Gotcha. Yeah, so if you want to ensure that users could never put a duplicate value into a primary key field, you would check this unique value box here under the validation tab in the field options.
And then you have this option for only data entry or always will come to you. If the record is failed.
Yeah, we tend to minimize our use of validation in the field options just because it's pretty not friendly for users. But primary keys are one of those exceptions I think that you're going to want to do. So okay. Yeah. Yep.
I think the way that we historically look at it is just what version did become available?
I think it was 12.
We were using way before then.
Right.
We just use them as serials. I know you said you want to dive into it. Serials have a lot of different things you've got to carry. You've got your own luggage. If you go into a dev environment, and then you go get a dev production, and you import the production record, you need to get into the last record, you see what the serial is, and you set it to the one that should be.
Yeah.
And a lot of serial numbers that you avoid.
Yep. Okay, so other things that are characteristic of primary keys, they should never change, and they should never be empty. So what that means is the moment that a record's made, it should have a value in that primary key, and it shouldn't be empty, and you should never later in some script or something change it. I've seen that, by the way. I've seen applications where the primary key gets changed. Like one common example is an estimating system where they have their estimates and their jobs in the same table. They'll just take an estimate and its number and then just tack on like a dash something to it. It'll still make it unique, but it's like bad practice to ever mess with the UUID. You should be making another field for that. And then every table you make should always have a primary key. Like it's very useful. I mean, there's a number of reasons why you should do it. I mean, it's hard to really leverage a relational database if you don't have a primary key in every table. But it's also useful for troubleshooting because you actually have a unique identifier for that record. So if that record changes and you need to go to a backup and see what it was from like a few days ago, you can figure out exactly what record it is in the backup because they have that primary key in them. Versus you having to compare columns, and sometimes in certain tables you won't have a combination of columns that are unique. But if you have a primary key, then that gets rid of that. So, and then the last thing I'll say about this, there's other types of keys besides foreign keys and primary keys, and one of them is an alternate key. An alternate key would be another unique field in your table. So an example is if you use UIDs for primary keys, but you do need a serial number that displays to the user, you could make a second field called an alternate key that is that serial number while still maintaining the UUID as the primary key. So, okay, what are foreign keys? So foreign keys are the other piece of the puzzle when it comes to making relationships or making, data model relationships. And so what is a foreign key? A foreign key is a primary key in another, of a table in another table. So for example, the customer ID in the order table, that customer ID in the order table is a foreign key because that is actually a primary key in the customer table. So that's hence the word foreign because it's in a different table, right? So that the primary key foreign key relationship is going to get you pretty far with data modeling. Understand that, you can do a lot of things. Okay, many to many relationships, you will see these all the time, and there is a systematic way to solve these many to many. So many to many are a problem. If you're trying to make relationships between a many to many, you're going to run into a problem. So let me walk you through what I mean. So let's take orders and products. Okay. You could have one product be on many orders. Like if you're selling, let's say you're Amazon, right? And you've got, I don't know, an Amazon Fire Stick, right? That's on Amazon.com. They sell those. One Amazon Fire Stick. A Fire Stick could be in thousands, millions of orders, right? And so, but with an order though, an order can have many products associated with it. So like one product can be on many orders, and then one order can have many products. So you've got this many to many thing going on. And you can't just use a primary key and foreign key to link them. You've got to basically transform them from a many to many relationship into a one to many, two different one to manys. So the classic example of this is taking that order product many to many and interjecting a join table is what it's called between it. In this case, that would be a line item table. And so what you'll see in this join table is you actually see it'll have foreign keys of both the outer tables in the join table. So there'll be in this case for the line item, you'll have an order ID foreign key, and you'll have a product ID foreign key. And so what ends up happening is in the order, you can have multiple line items in an order, and one line item is a product. But one line item is only associated with one product and one order. So
Commonly called associative.
Is it associative entity? I don't think I knew that term. Kevin's got some deep database background. From what? From Kelly School of Business? Yeah. Yeah. So, point is, when you're thinking about many-to-many relationships, just realize that you should, in an ideal world, you should be able to interject an entity between the two to make it a one-to-many, a join table, associative entity, where you have both foreign keys in there.
Do you still make a UID in that table?
You do. Good question. Because every table needs a UID, needs a primary key. So, otherwise, you're going to have to run into those problems again where it's, if you're troubleshooting, you could have two line items that look very similar. I mean, you could have, it's not that common, but there are times where an order can have the same product twice. Because maybe you're pricing it a little different. Maybe you have a normal price and maybe you have a second line that's like half off or something and you needed to create a second. Yeah. So, yes. You should have a primary key. All right. So now that is everything when it comes to data model. So we just walk through how to determine a data model for an application. So let's take that knowledge and let's go ahead, and the next step would be to create your data model in FileMaker. So basically taking your ERD here and making actual relationships in FileMaker. So that's what an order to order line item, that's what that looks like there in FileMaker. All right, so how do you create a relationship on the graph? Let's get up here. So I'm going to take, I actually have, so FM Quick Start, are you guys familiar? Do you know, we we have a free template online at fmquickstart.com that you can download. So feel free to go download this after the demo. And this is, it's actually an older version of the system. We have a newer version up. Yeah, what we're going to do is to demonstrate how to create relationships and to go through some of this stuff. We are going to add a documents module to a customer. So if we go back to our ABC Automotive, let's say they came to you and they're like, hey, we need to be able to attach files to a customer. Like I need to be able to, attach just PDFs, Excel files, things that are related to this customer. I need to be able to, put it in their customer file. So you're like, okay, cool. So what's the first step with this? Well, the first step is that we need a documents table. So in FileMaker, I'm just going to go ahead and create a documents table real quick. So I'm going to go to my tables tab here and I'm going to type in the table name document. I'm going to press create. And then I'm going to double click on the new table and you start with nothing. So I just created a table. What do I know? I know that every table needs a primary key. So I'm going to go ahead and create a primary key and I'm going to use our DB services convention on this. And it's going to be a UID, so we're going to make it a text field. And then I'm going to go into the field options and under auto enter, I'm going to do a calculated value and do get UID here. And then I'm going to uncheck this do not replace existing value of any field. I'm going to do that because if users duplicate a record in this table, by having this unchecked, it's going to fire the auto enter and generate a new UID because you want it to be, you don't want duplicates in the primary key. So, okay, so we've created the basic structure of this table. So what's the next step? I need to relate it to a customer. And based on what ABC Automotive said, one customer can have multiple documents. I can attach, I want to be able to attach as many files, many documents as I want to a customer. So how do I allow that? One document can only be associated to one customer, but a customer can have multiple documents. So that's a one-to-many relationship. So that goes back to our primary key to foreign key situation that we talked about. So I'm going to create so we're in the document table. To implement this, I need to create a foreign key to the customer. So I'm going to create a customer ID foreign key in here. And so that's how we name it in DB services. We have a little underscore and then KFT. So K stands for key, F is foreign, and then T is the data type. In this case, it's text because these are UUIDs we're working with. The two underscores for the primary key to make sure it's sorted at the top. because FileMaker sorts underscores before letters. So and then double underscore sorts it above foreign keys, which are single underscore. So, okay, and then the final thing is I actually need a place to store the file itself. Like I need a field to store the container data. So I'm just gonna create a document field, and I'm gonna make it a container. So that's our basic table structure. So I'm gonna save manage database. I'm gonna go back into it. And so now the next step is that we need to implement the one-to-many relationship from customer to document. So I'm going to go into the relationship graph, which we have a bunch. Since this is a template, we already have a bunch of stuff here. So you can just kind of ignore everything. I'm going to go down to the customer group here, and to create a new relationship, and to create it in an anchor buoy relationship graph, which we'll be covering towards the end of the presentation. But our relationship graph that we have in our applications is an anchor buoy model. And you'll see that because you'll have what's called the base table here, or the anchor, and then you'll have these buoys over here on the right. So when you're making a new relationship, you have to first find the group that you're trying to create the relationship off of. And so in this case, I'm trying to create the customer to document relationship. So I found the customer group. And then I need to add a new table occurrence, is what this is called. So with FileMaker's, one thing that it's important to note is that FileMaker's relationship graph is not an ERD. It's a query graph, is kind of the way I like to think of it. So what you can, because it's a query graph, which is a collection of queries, collection of relationships, you can add the same table multiple times. So I'm going to add, like, let me cancel out this, let me show you this. So do you see this up here? FileMaker automatically added a table occurrence to the graph of the new table I created. But I can add another occurrence. I can add that one. I can just keep adding the same table to the graph as many times as I want. That's why they're called TOs, table occurrence, the occurrence of a table on the graph. But with ERDs, the way ERDs work, like it's just, the one table shows up once with ERDs, and all your ERD is a diagram that shows the natural relationships between entities. So you can't have the documents multiple times on an ERD. I mean, I guess you could, but you're kind of breaking convention. But with FileMaker, you can have as many instances of a table as you want on there. So anyway, going back to this, I'm going to make a new TO to the document table, and then I'm going to go ahead and just name it in the convention, which it's outside the scope of this to talk about our convention. But we do have an article, if you guys are interested, on our website, naming conventions article, if you want to learn about like how we name these buoys. Okay, and so the relationship is going to be customer ID to customer ID is how this is going to work, right? So I added my TO, and then there's two ways to create a relationship in FileMaker, because at this point I haven't created a relationship. One way is just to drag two fields together between the two occurrences that you want to create the relationship between. And so in this case, between customer and document is what I want. So now you'll see FileMaker's created a line, right? So that is the relationship. That line is the graphical representation of the relationship I just made. So I'm going to double click on here, and this brings up the edit relationship dialog. And then you can select your two keys that you need in your relationship. And so in this case, I'm doing customer ID on the left, and so you can see this is the left TO, and the right TO, and that's a document. This is the customer ID over here, the foreign key. So I'm doing primary to foreign, and you can see, you can double check and make sure that this is right, and this looks good. And that is how you create a relationship in FileMaker, a one-to-many. You guys created relationships before like this? Everyone's okay. All right. Do you guys, anyone use Anchor Buoy? Like, are you able to kind of follow what's going on a little bit? Questions about what happened there? Anyone? No? Okay. I'm not there yet. So, okay. So before I go, so I'm going to explain some other things in the edit relationship dialog before I get to that. So I've created the relationship, right? So I should be able to just take that relationship and use it on this customer screen here for users to add documents. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So in relation, I'm in layout mode right now. I'm going to add a new tab. So let's just call it documents. So the way to see multiple related records on a screen in FileMaker, on a layout in FileMaker, is use a portal. So I'm going to insert, I'm going to go ahead and put a portal here. I'm not going to make it pretty. This is just for demonstration purposes. So when I add a portal to a screen, FileMaker brings with a portal setup, and the first thing you have to select is what related records you want to show. And you'll see right here that the only ones I can select are the ones that are from that customer group, because I'm in the customer context. And so I'm going to go down to my documents relationship that I made. And I'm going to be like, great, looks good. And I'm just going to go ahead and move the document over here, because it asks you what fields you want to add to the portal. It's like, great, all right. And so I'm going to go over here, and so I have a problem. My problem now is, like, I'm seeing nothing at the moment. So for your users to be able to actually create a record in this documents portal, you could make a script, like a button that's like new document, and you could script it. But there's a quick way that you can give them the ability to create a new related record through a portal. And the quick way is to go back to your relationship on the relationship graph. So I go back in here. You'll see down at the bottom, there's these options, these checkboxes. One of them is this allow creation of records in this table via this relationship. And so if I check this over on the document side, that will then allow me to, as a user, to actually, now if you see, I can click into this. So FileMaker creates like a blank row in a portal, and then I can start inserting or creating those records. Now, so I actually created a document record right there. And you can, just to show you, and I'm going to put the primary key of this document in the portal. Bad developer, don't do it. Don't do it. I'm just doing it just to show you guys. I'm showing you this. Don't ever put UIDs in the screens. You'll scare your users. Your users will not want to use your application. Don't do that. But you'll see the second row here. I can click into these fields, but you'll see the primary key is not filled in. That's because the record doesn't exist yet. But FileMaker gives you this ability as a user to create the record. The moment that you fill in any one of these fields, it'll then create the record, the UID. You'll see the UID filled in. So the creation relation, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the primary key. Just, don't want to scare people. But yeah, the primary key, the allow creation option in the relationship is by far the quickest way as a developer to give your users the ability to create records, related records. So that's one of the most useful things here in the edit relationship. The other ones here, these other two checkboxes, this delete related records in this table, when a record is deleted in the other table, this is called cascade deleting. Cascade deleting is something you should set up. So in this case, I do want to check this because if a user deletes a customer and there were like 3 document records on that customer, I want the database to automatically delete those document records, because it doesn't make sense for those 3 records to still exist when the its parent, the product, I'm sorry, the customer record was deleted. So that's called cascade deleting. It'll automatically happen. So I can, just to show you this, I'm going to go to the layout. What's that? Yeah, exactly. So you'll see there's the two document records I made are in here in the table. And if I delete this customer record here, it'll actually, you see it automatically wiped out the document records on the right. So if I didn't have that delete option checked, then this would still have those two records, even though I deleted the parent record. And then you now have what are called orphans. You have orphans with no parent. And orphans can cause issues in a database. The main issue is that it's just taking up unneeded space, but it can also cause problems with reporting. Like if you have reports that are like pulling data from the child, you could be inflating your numbers if you are pulling in children records that shouldn't exist because you didn't, they're orphans. Like if you have line items, let's say you have, you had 50,000 orders in 2017, and you have a report that adds up all of the totals for the line items, like all the revenue for each of the items you sold. And so your report's based on that, but you had like 500 line item records that were orphans. Those totals will get included. Those line items will get included in your totals, and you'll inflate your revenue. So, or a sales tax report, and you give the government more money than you should, and that would not be a fun thing to do. So don't do that. Don't leave orphans. Make sure to, when you're setting up your relationships in the relationship graph, that you check that cascade option where it's appropriate. I do know that if you do it in the wrong way, if you check that option and where you shouldn't have, you will cause chaos in your database. I don't know if you have. Do you have an example of that? I know we had a customer, right, that had a.
I remember that customer very well.
Yeah. What was it?
Mysteriously, records disappearing. And because they had a cascade delete in the wrong place. They were deleting basically line items and orders. It was wiping out product. And they're like, I don't know why they keep disappearing, and it's random. And so the naming convention that being played there, if you look at Softfix, Softfix is the naming convention, how it's stored. And the reason the naming convention is what it is because we don't want to print out the graph to know what the hell is going on. We want to just be able to look at that relationship and it tells us the whole story. So in there, you'll see that it's got cascade creation and deletion. And so the way I solved that problem with the customer a long time ago before I had one gray hair was I just named the graph as I was going through the graph and naming it to understand. I saw that cascade delete. That would be why. So it's a good trust building exercise.
Yes. Yeah. So I went ahead and added the suffixes he's talked about here, so you can see that there's a creation option checked and the cascade deletes checked.
Or the customer will say, I don't trust FileMaker. I think it's really good.
Yeah. Yes, it's the methodology. So I can just skip ahead and talk about it a little bit since we're kind of getting into it. But anchor buoy, you are forcing a direction on the graph. You're forcing everything to evaluate left to right. And so you would never check things on the left here. Even though FileMaker gives you the option, that FileMaker is natively bidirectional on the graph. Anchor buoy simplifies that bidirectionality by forcing one direction. So you shouldn't. Yeah, I do know there are some anchor buoy graphs that I have seen both options checked, and I've had to be like, you don't know, you're like, create two, delete two, I don't understand. Yeah, the issue though, you're talking like over here. Yeah, the problem with that is part of the convention. What's nice about the convention is that when you're like selecting a relationship, you'll see how they're sorted alphabetically. And if you like put in there like create or delete, then like it gets all messed up the sort. Like you'll see that all these are here, and then yeah. Right, it would mess with the sort. Yeah, it's lined right here, all caps. You'd be messing that. Yeah, like if I threw that into this order right here, I put a crate. That crate would show up right here, right? And that would kind of mess up. You're trying to look for an order relationship. You now have to look over the entire thing. It slows you down when it comes to trying to find what you're looking for.
You make the documents too.
Yeah.
FileMaker drops right on the graph that table. You're so anxious, excited about using that. So you just drag it down to where you want it. And now you have made the base table one of the